Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Kiddushin, pages 35 through 41, Lamed Hey from Mem Aleph. 35. Mitzvot lo taseh, negative commandments, echad hanashim, v'echad hanashim chayavim. Both men and women, regardless of gender, are obligated in those mitzvot. But how do we know this? Minahani mili. Amar Kra, because the Torah tells us, Ish o Isha, whether man or woman, ki yasumi kol chatot adam, who will violate one of the sins that a person can sin. Hishva katuv ish isha leish l'chol anashim shebatorah. In that one verse, the Torah equates men and women for all punishments of the Torah. Punishment for violating negative commandments were all the same. So whereas there is a disparity between men and women when it comes to performative mitzvot aseh, positive time-bound versus not, there's no such distinction drawn when it comes to mitzvot lo ta'aseh. Negative commandments, everybody's equal. Lamed vav. Smichot, when it comes to the performing of smicha, the laying of the hands on a sacrificial animal, whereby you put all your weight on the head of the animal with your hands, and you say a confessional, but just before the shechita, before the animal is slaughtered as a sacrifice. So smichot, noagim ba'anashim, v'lo b'nashim. Men perform smicha, but women do not perform smicha. Where do we know this? Dichtiv, as it says in Torah, Daber b'nei Yisrael, speak unto the children of Israel, v'samach, and they shall lay their hands. B'nei Yisrael somchim, the sons of Israel will do the laying of the hands. Then b'not Yisrael somchot, but the daughters of Israel will not do the laying of the hands. Now that said, there's a sugya in the Gemara elsewhere that talks about a scenario whereby women did do smicha, that there was a sacrifice in the temple courtyard, and one of the great sages allowed the women to lay their hands on the animal. And we questioned the legitimacy of doing so. And the answer was it was not a real smicha. It was something of a bluff. It was a faux ceremony, but it was done because there was a sincere desire to give women a sense of satisfaction in their religious observance, that they too can participate, at least symbolically, in the sacrificial service. And so they were allowed to put their hands near the head of the animal in something that resembled smicha, but was not actually smicha, because if it was not allowed, then to put the hands on the head of the animal would be a violation of using the animal for illegitimate purposes, and that cannot be done with a korban. Lamed Zayin. Chovat haguf noheget bein ba'aretz menuchutz la'aretz. So there are many mitzvot which are tluot ba'aretz, we're dependent upon the soil, the ground of Eretz Yisrael, that they are incumbent upon us to perform when we're in our ancestral homeland, Eretz Yisrael, but we do not do them in the Golah, the diaspora. However, bodily mitzvot that have nothing to do with the soil, but rather which we do with our person, chovat haguf, and have no bearing on the land, are obligatory in the land and outside the land. So we who live here in America, I live here in New York and Westchester, we have to do mitzvot haguf no matter where we happen to be. Lamed Chet, 38. B'shiva ba'adar met Moshe, u'v'shiva ba'adar nolad. So Moshe died on the 7th of Adar, that's his yahrzeit, and Moshe was born on the 7th of Adar. It's his birthday. So he had lived exactly 120 years and died on his birthday. The Gemara asks, Minayin, how do we know this? And it goes through a whole long discussion about how we can prove that Moshe died on the 7th of Adar. The gist of it is that there was a 30-day mourning period of Avelut, Shloshim Yom, for Moshe Rabbeinu. It's mentioned in the Torah. And the period of time after the Avelut for Moshe, which followed before the crossing of the Jordan River, the Yarden, was 3 days of preparation. The crossing of the Yarden was on the 10th of Nisan. So if you do the math, you run the numbers, then it turns out that on the 7th of Adar was the P'tirah, the death of Moshe. Now, how do we know he was born that day? Because it says in Torah that he was 120 years old that day, Hayom, implying that he was exactly that number and not that plus a little remainder. So it must be that his day of death was actually his birthday, the day of his 120th birthday. Lamed Tet, 39. Hilei Kerem, when it comes to the prohibited admixtures in a vineyard, when you're growing crops other than grapes together with grapes in a vineyard, it's a big no-no. The Ba'aretz Asrim B'Hana'ah, in the land of Israel, if you were to do that, the yield, the produce that comes from that intermingling, is forbidden to have any benefit from. So in the diaspora, the sages ruled you can't grow such things. Why, if in Israel it's such a serious prohibition, you can't even benefit from it, then in the diaspora you can't grow it. When it comes to the admixture in the grain field, not the vineyard but the grain field, the ba'aretz lo asir bahana, that in the land of Israel it's forbidden to grow this, but if you were to grow it, it's not forbidden to derive benefit from it. B'chutz la'aretz, that outside the land of Israel, nami lo gazru b'rabbanan, the sages didn't decree anything, and essentially there was no prohibition. Mem, page 40. Noach lo la'adam. It is better for a person shi'avor avera b'seter to violate a rule of the Torah, to commit a sin in secret, rather than profane the name of heaven in a public manner. So, what is this? Practically speaking, what does this mean? If a person sees that their evil inclination, their desire for sin, is overtaking them, they can't stop it. They're going to do something wrong. Then what should they do? How do they conduct themselves in this less than ideal situation? Go to a place where they don't recognize you. And dress in all black and wrap yourself in black. Basically, make yourself inconspicuous and unidentifiable. And then what? Do what your heart desires. Not because it's legal, not because it's kosher, but because there's no way to stop you. At least this way we mitigate the damage by making sure that no one is witnessing a profanation of God's name and a gross violation of Torah. Mem Aleph, 41. A man can betroth a woman, whether through his own actions or by way of the actions of his designated agent, his shaliach. So the Gemara asks, why does it mention bo ubishlucho? If you can use an agent, of course you can do it yourself. So why bother mentioning the bo? The Gemara responds, mitzvah bo yotem bishlucho. Well, it's better, it's more of a mitzvah, a greater performance of the mitzvah, if you do it with your own self, in a bodily fashion, rather than pass it along to a shaliach, an emissary, to do for you. It's better to do it yourself than to be totally vicarious. So the Gemara gives an example of great rabbis of the Amoraic period who were very wealthy and could afford household help, but nonetheless they were involved in Sabbath preparations. For example, Rav Malach Shibut L'Chavod Shabbos, Rav salted the fish for the honor of the Sabbath, because it's a better mitzvah if you do it than if you designate someone else to do it. Everyone have a great week.